A very good day to all of you. I am Professor Manish Mamtani from the Department of Geology and Geophysics, Indian Institute of Technology, Kharagpur, and I am delighted to be part of the sixth Shear Zones and Crustal Blocks of Southern India Open Conference that is being organized by the Department of Geology, University of Kerala. Thanks to Dr. Pradeep Kumar, who invited me to deliver this talk on the topic analyzing paleostress during cratonization, an example from the Dharwar Craton. Before I go to the scientific presentation, I take this opportunity to thank the very dedicated team of researchers that has worked around me in doing my research activities in the fabric analysis lab in IIT Kharagpur. I would be really lost without them. And at the time, what can a researcher do without funding? I also take this opportunity to thank particularly the Ministry of Earth Sciences that has funded my research work on the Dharwar Craton for the past several years. Okay, so what is a craton? It is an old and stable part of the continental lithosphere, and there are several cratons on Earth. One of them is the Superior Craton in Canada, and the focus of today's study is going to be the Dharwar Craton, which lies in India. And some important characteristics of cratons are that they are Archean in age, they are dominated by accretion of smaller continental blocks, and stabilization is associated with generation of juvenile continental crust or by granite emplacement. The fundamental question that we need to address today is how to determine paleostress prevalent during the stabilization of or cratonization of cratons. The idea that we are going to test is stabilization of cratons is associated with granite emplacement. Paleostress during granitization must then give us information about paleostress during cratonization. But the major challenge lies in actually having methods to determine the paleostress during granitization. And the solution to this is as follows. And this is what we are going to test in the present seminar. Granite emplacement or granite melt generation to emplacement is a very dynamic process, which in most cases is controlled by regional tectonics. The final phase of granite formation is associated with the emplacement of pegmatite dikes, and this we know commonly from many granites on Earth, and use these pegmatite dikes to determine the paleostress during cratonization. So this is the logic that is going to be applied and tested in the present study, and I am going to make a detailed presentation of how we have actually applied this. So we all know that the Dharwar Craton is located in southern India, and we have the Dharwar Craton divided into the eastern and the western Dharwar Craton. Both these blocks are separated by the Chitradurga boundary fault, or it is also commonly referred to as the Chitradurga shear zone. Uh, let's look at the regional perspective about the Dharwar Craton. Uh, some of the oldest rocks that form the basement of the supracrustal rocks are referred to as the peninsular gneisses, and these have an age of 3.4 to 3.0 Ga. The accretion of the eastern and the western Dharwar craton is reported to have occurred sometime between 2.75 to 2.51 Ga. There are several greenstone belts or schist belts in the region. These are comprised of the metavolcanics, and there are also banded iron formations in the region. There are metapelitic rocks also in the region, and then there are granites of around 2.5 Ga in age in several regions within the Dharwar craton. The metavolcanic, commonly we also call these the metabasaltic rocks. They commonly have large number of quartz veins, and in some of the areas within the Dharwar craton uh, and within the schist belts of the Dharwar craton, we have these quartz veins which contain gold. For example, there is gold in the Gadag schist belt, and of course, the most important Hatti schist belt is also containing gold. And the age of gold is mineralization is 2.5 Ga according to several studies. Uh, in terms of regional deformation, there are three phases of deformation commonly reported across different parts of the Dharwar craton. There may be some local variations at places, but largely we have a northeast southwest compression that controlled the D1 D2 deformation, and this led to development of folds with axial planes oriented in northwest southeast direction. And you have a D3 deformation, which is the late deformation in the region that was controlled by northwest southeast compression, and this resulted in development of superposed folds, dome and basin geometry in some of the metapelitic rocks, as well as in the banded iron formations of the Dharwar craton. And this superimposition of these deformations is reported in different rock types across the Dharwar craton. Okay, so the Dharwar craton is intruded by large number of plutonic rocks, which are dated between 2.5 and 2.6 Ga. For example, in the western part, we have the Mulgund granite. Then, as we go on the other side of the Chitradurga shear zone, we have the Koppal Pluton. You go further east, we have the Clospet granite, and then we also have the Kavital granite. There is also a Yalgatti granite in this region. All these granitoids, as we commonly call them, the younger granitoids, they are around 2.5 Ga in age, and the exact ages are now listed in the slide before you. And the focus of the present study is this part where there is the Chitradurga shear zone, and we have the western Dharwar craton, which has the Mulgund granite, and on the eastern side of the Chitradurga shear zone, we have the Koppal granitoid, which is syenitic in composition, and that is the Chitradurga shear zone in between them. So this is going to be the focus of our present study. And the question we are addressing is, what was the state of stress when cratonization of the Dharwar craton took place? Because now in the present, in this particular study area, we have western Dharwar craton, we also have the eastern Dharwar craton, and we have granitoids in both the parts represented in this study area. And please bear in mind that the accretionary process and the cratonization of the Dharwar craton has taken place at 2.5 GA. The following modus operandi will be adopted. Initially, I will present magnetic fabric and microstructural data from the Mulgund granite, which lies in the eastern Dharwar craton, and I will summarize the time relation between emplacement and regional deformation for the Mulgund granite. Subsequently, I'll follow it up with the data from the copal syenite, uh, which lies in the eastern Dharwar craton, and summarize the time relation between emplacement and regional deformation for the copal pluton. I'll follow this up with a comparison between the data from these two, bodies, these two plutons. Because the copal pluton is intruded by several pegmatite dikes, we will use these dikes to decipher the state of stress for the copal pluton, and eventually comment on the state of stress during stabilization of the Dharwar craton. So this is the generalized regional geological map of the study area, where in between you have the Chitradurga shear zone and the Mulgund granite lies to the west and the Koppal pluton lies to the east. Let us now look at the Mulgund granite in western Dharwar craton, which lies to the west of the Gadag schist belt. So this is the focus of the study right now, where we have the Mulgund granite, and at the same time we have the metavolcanic rocks lying to the east of the Mulgund granite. So both these rocks, the metabasalts and the granite, they are very massive in appearance when we go to the field. The mesoscopic foliation and lineation is very rare in these rocks. And because of this, we must rely on a technique other than just field observation to determine the planar and linear fabric elements and petrofabrics in these rocks. And that technique that I will use in this study is the anisotropy of magnetic susceptibility. When we prepare thin sections of the granite, of the Mulgund granite, and observe the microstructures under the petrological microscope, there is plenty of evidence to indicate that the granite is deformed, and textures such as chessboard pattern in quartz, uh, deformation twins in feldspar, and bulging recrystallization in quartz are very common. So this is clearly telling us that the granite is deformed. However, to determine the time relationship between deformation and regional tectonics, we need to know that these textures, these deformation textures have developed uh, with syntectonically with which regional deformation, D1, D2, or D3. And doing this in the absence of mesoscopic scale foliations and lineations is impossible. And therefore, we have to rely on alternative techniques to determine the planar and linear fabric elements in the granite, and that technique is anisotropy of magnetic susceptibility, or AMS. These are the AMS sampling sites for the metavasalt and the Mulgund granite. So the details of how the AMS analysis is done is out of the scope of the present seminar, because that would require a separate seminar. Uh, the audience can just bear in mind that the samples, which are the oriented samples, sample blocks, are collected from the field, and AMS analysis on cylindrical oriented cores is carried out in the lab, and the technique is based on a very simple principle that if the rock has any preferred orientation uh, within it, then it will have an anisotropy in its magnetic susceptibility. And this is essentially being measured with the help of AMS analysis. And this is a good way of determining the internal fabric in massive rocks which do not show visible fabric elements like foliations and lineations. So this is the magnetic foliation map for the Mulgund granite as well as the metabasalt. And it is seen that both these rocks contain a magnetic foliation which is northwest southeast dominated, striking. So mean orientation of the magnetic foliation in the granite and the metabasalt is similar. So this is telling us that a similar deformation has controlled the development of this foliation in the two rocks. In addition, it is also noted that the magnetic foliation is overall parallel or subparallel to the orientation of the schist belt, which is northwest southeast striking. And the magnetic foliation can be inferred to have developed during regional D1 D2 deformation on account of northeast southwest compression. Uh, the audience will recollect that I mentioned in the beginning that um, in the Dharwar Craton there are three deformations, and the first two deformations D1 D2 are controlled by northeast southwest compression. So in accordance with this deformation history, we can infer that the magnetic foliation, which is northwest southeast striking in the metabasalts and the Mulgund granite in the vicinity of Gadag region, must have developed during the D1 D2 deformation. This is the magnetic lineation map of the study area for the metabasalt as well as the Mulgund granite, and it is pretty obvious here that the lineations, the magnetic lineations, are doubly plunging, where the plunge is varying from northwest to southeast. This implies that there is some evidence of superimposition of D3 over D1 D2 deformation. Um the audience will again recollect that I had mentioned earlier that superimposition of D3 over D1 D2 deformation has resulted in dome basin geometry in some of the metapelitic and the banded iron formations rocks in the region. So a similar interpretation can be made with regards to the superposed deformation history on the basis of the doubly plunging attitude of the magnetic lineations in the metabasalt as well as the Mulgund granite. This Mulgund granite is dated to be 2555 plus minus 6 MA in age, and therefore we can infer that the minimum age of the D1 D2 deformation must be 2549. So, so far we have seen data related to the Mulgund granite, And this is syntectonic with D1 D2 deformation, and it has also been influenced by the D3 deformation, which is manifested in the doubly plunging attitude of the magnetic lineations. Now let us look at the copal syenite, which lies in the eastern Dharwar craton to the east of the Chitradurga shear zone. The questions about the copal pluton are: what is the time relationship between emplacement of the copal pluton, fabric development, and regional deformation? How does this compare with data from the Mulgund granite in the western Dharwar craton? And the second very important question is, can pegmatite dikes intruding the copal pluton be used for paleostress analysis? This can provide information about the state of stress during cratonization of the Dharwar craton. Let's look at some of the field data that we have from the Copal region. In the Copal region, you have some beautiful exposures of peninsular gneiss, and the foliations can be physically measured in the field, and the foliation is northwest southeast to northwest southeast striking. However, the copal pluton, which is cyanotic in composition, is pretty massive in occurrence. That means the foliation and the lineation on the mesoscopic scale is not visible with the naked eye. At the same time, the copal pluton is intruded by several pegmatite dikes. When we look at the microstructures in the copal syenite, we find that there is presence of myrmekite, which is again a texture that indicates solid state deformation. There is presence of deformation twins in feldspar, and we also have bent twins in feldspar as well as bulging quartz grains. So all these microstructures imply that the copal pluton is deformed. Now again, just like the Mulgund granite, the copal granitoid or the copal pluton also has the same problem, that we do not have a visible foliation or lineation to decipher the time relationship between emplacement of this pluton and regional deformation. And hence, we have to now rely again on anisotropy of magnetic susceptibility data, and these are the different sampling sites for the copal pluton, and also the surrounding peninsular gneiss. This is the magnetic foliation map for the copal pluton and the adjacent peninsular gneiss. The magnetic foliation in the pluton is northeast southwest striking. On the other hand, the magnetic foliation as well as the field foliation in the peninsular gneiss is northwest southeast striking. So they are different. Another important thing that I would like to draw your attention to is that the eastern part of the copal pluton is dominated by steeper magnetic foliations. So if you can see the magnetic foliation map of the copal pluton, we find that steep dips are prevalent in this eastern part as compared to the western part, and this will have implications while developing the three-dimensional model for emplacement of the pluton, which we will see subsequently. So an important inference is that the peninsular gneiss has evidence of D1 D2 deformation, because the foliations are dominantly north-west southeast oriented or north-northwest south-southeast oriented. On the other hand, the copal pluton has magnetic foliations that are northeast southwest striking, and this is the direction in which planar structures related to D3 deformation have developed in the Dharwar Craton. Uh, as I said earlier, and I repeat it once again, that D1 D2 deformation in the Dharwar Craton is known to be controlled by northeast southwest shortening, and this resulted in northwest southeast striking planar fabric elements. D3 deformation was controlled by northwest southeast shortening, and this resulted in development of superposed folds, doubly plunging attitude of lineations, and uh, planar fabric elements that would be northeast southwest striking. This is the magnetic lineation map for the copal pluton and the gneiss, and it is noted that the overall magnetic lineations are moderate to steeply plunging. And once again, kindly note that the steeper plunges are dominated in the eastern part of the copal pluton as compared to the western part. An important parameter that is obtained from AMS studies is the degree of magnetic anisotropy, which is given the notation PJ. This is actually the a gauge of the eccentricity of the AMS ellipsoid, and it is also, it can be visualized as a good gauge of the intensity of strain, although it is not a parameter that gives absolute value of strain, but the variation of degree of magnetic anisotropy from point to point in a particular lithology is a good indicator of how the strain varies from one point to another point in a big body. Likewise, the AMS analysis also provides us with another parameter, which is the intensity of the magnetic lineation given by the notation capital L. And that is the also a measure of how the intensity of lineation is varying from point to point in a huge body. So what we have here are the contoured degree of magnetic anisotropy and intensity of magnetic lineation maps before us, and these are clearly telling us that the fabric intensity in the copal pluton increases towards the northwest. And when we do field work at the northwestern margin of the copal pluton, we encounter such shear zones at the margin, and this is clearly a field evidence that tells us that there is high strain in the gneisses at the northwestern margin of the copal pluton. So whatever data I have presented so far is helping us to conceive an emplacement model for the copal pluton. So we visualize that there is presence of northwest southeast oriented S1 S2 fabric in the peninsular gneiss, and then there was the D3 deformation that took place, and this was controlled by northwest southeast shortening. So in stage 1, because of the northwest southeast orientation, there is a creation of space like a mode 1 crack by dilating the S1 S2 fabric in the peninsular gneiss. Uh, Subsequently, in stage 2, the copal granitoid, it starts to emplace and it occupies the space that was generated by this dilation of the S1 S2 fabric. And then finally, with the continued deformation, progressive emplacement takes place and the granitoid ballooned. This ballooning was asymmetric, with the foliation in the eastern part having steeper dips as compared to the western part. And I had mentioned about this in one of the previous slides. And the field evidence that we see of the high strain zone uh, in the northwestern part of the copal pluton is preserved in this particular part. So this is the emplacement model for the copal pluton. So what do we have so far? That is, what information do we have so far? We now know that the Mulgun granite is syntectonic emplacement with D1, D2 regional deformation. Uh, it has developed magnetic foliation, which is northwest southeast striking, and this was controlled by the northeast southwest shortening. And subsequently, as I already discussed, there is some influence of D3 also in the Mulgun granite, um which is manifested in the doubly plunging attitude of the magnetic lineations. So the D1, D2 deformation in the Dharwar craton can safely be considered to be greater or equal to 2549 Ma in age. On the other hand, the copal granitoid, which is 2528 plus minus 9 Ma in age, is syntectonic with D3 deformation. It has magnetic foliation which is northeast southwest striking, and therefore it can safely be concluded that the emplacement of the copal granitoid was controlled by northwest southeast shortening that resulted in the development of northeast southwest striking magnetic foliation. Hence, the D3 deformation in the Dharwar craton can be uh, considered to be less than or equal to 2537 Ma. So I have just considered the plus minus, these error, this range of ages to arrive at this inference. So for the copal granitoid, we can say that it is Syn D3 emplacement, its age, the age of D3 in the Dharwar craton is less than or equal to 2537 Ma. The stabilization of the Dharwar craton is known to be at 2.5 Ga. The copal granitoid is intruded by pegmatite dikes, and this I have already mentioned in the beginning of my presentation. So now our objective will be that whether we can utilize these pegmatite dikes to determine the paleostress and then comment on cratonization of the Dharwar craton at 2.5 Ga. These are some field occurrences of the pegmatite dikes that intrude the copal pluton. Uh, it is clear from the field observations that these pegmatite dikes are dilational in nature, and this can be inferred on the basis of this type of field evidence where the crystals of quartz and feldspar are growing perpendicular to the host rock wall. The pegmatite dikes in the copal pluton, they have dominantly northwest southeast strike, which is different from the orientation of the magnetic foliation. So these are the different sites from which pegmatite dike orientation data was collected, and we also collected pegmatite dike data from the peninsular gneiss. And when we compare the two, we find that uh, the pegmatite dikes in the peninsular gneiss have a wider range of orientations as compared to the uh, dikes in the copal granitoid. The copal granitoid dominantly has northwest-southeast strike, whereas in the case of the peninsular gneiss, the strike of the dikes is varying between northwest-southeast to even east-northeast, west-southwest. So now we are going to use these pegmatite dikes from the copal Pluton to plot the 3D Mohr stress circle and then comment on the state of stress. Okay, so the principles of preparing the 3D Mohr circle from vein orientation or dike orientation data were developed in the 1980s through the 1990s. Essentially, Delany et al. 1986, they established that the fluid pressure needs to be greater or equal to the normal stress in order to dilate or reactivate a pre-existing fracture. And a set of equations was developed by Delany et al. And subsequently further developed and applied by Bayer et al. 1994 and Joly and Sanderson 1997. And there are two important parameters here, the driving pressure ratio and the stress ratio, and the equations are before you on the screen. Uh, Now here you see that for the stress ratio, there are two equations. One is for PF, that is fluid pressure less than sigma 2, and the other one is PF greater than sigma 2. Uh, I am sure all of you know that sigma 1, sigma 2, sigma 3 are the three principal axes of the stress ellipsoid. So for all practical purposes, in order to relate the distribution of veins on a lower hemisphere equal area projection to the Mohr circle, uh, uh, this aspect is best understood from the work of Joly and Sanderson 1997. Uh, Practically speaking, one has to plot the orientation of pole to veins or dikes that has been collected from field on a lower hemisphere equal area projection, and depending upon the distribution of these poles, whether you have a clustered distribution, which means that there is going to be a very restricted range of orientations on a stereographic projection, or you have a girdle distribution, that means there is a large range of orientations of poles to veins on a stereographic projection. Now these differences give us information about uh, where the fluid pressure stands vis-a-vis the sigma 2, uh, that is the intermediate principal stress. So this aspect is best understood when we try to evaluate this particular diagram, which is figure 4 of the work of Joly and Sanderson 1997. Uh, in this particular diagram, we see that if the PF is very low and fluid pressure is very low, that is, and in these diagrams, these shaded parts on the left hand side, they represent the position or the intensity of fluid pressure as compared to the principal stresses. So in the figure A, it is mentioned that the fluid pressure Pf is equal to sigma 3, and so uh, the fluid pressure is not high enough to cause any increase, to cause any dilation of any pre-existing anisotropy, and hence you have no veins forming. But as the fluid pressure goes on increasing, the fluid pressure, this shaded part on the left hand side, it starts to enter the Mohr stress circle. So this implies that there will be certain orientations of fractures that will be susceptible to get dilated, and veins will form along them. Now, because the fluid pressure is less than sigma 2, but it is greater than sigma 3, there will be a clustered distribution of poles to dikes or veins, and this tells us that Pf is less than sigma 2. Now, as the fluid pressure goes on increasing, there will be a stage when the Pf is greater than sigma 2, and this is when there will be veins with a large number of orientations present in the outcrops. And when we plot the poles of these veins or dikes on a lower hemisphere equal area projection, then they will plot throughout the diagram, and this indicates that the distribution is a girdle distribution, and uh, this type of distribution clearly tells us that Pf is greater than sigma 2. So these differences in the poles to veins or dikes in a lower hemisphere equal area projection are to be taken into consideration to decide which equation for stress ratio needs to be applied for a particular. So these are the lower hemisphere equal area projections for poles to dikes in the Koppel Pluton and the peninsular gneiss. The pegmatite dikes in the Koppel Pluton have a restricted range of orientations, hence there is a clustered distribution, and following the principles that were developed by Joly and Sanderson in 1997, we can clearly come to the inference that Pf in the case of pegmatite dikes in the Koppel Pluton was less than sigma 2. In contrast, the pegmatite dikes in the peninsular gneiss, they have a wide range of orientations, a girdle distribution, and this implies Pf greater than sigma 2. So now these lower hemisphere equal area projections for the dikes in the gneiss and the Pluton, Koppel Pluton, can be used to determine the state of stress. Uh, we are able to determine the orientations of the three principal axes of the stress ellipsoid, sigma 1, sigma 2, and sigma 3, and we have the necessary data using the principles developed by Joly and Sanderson uh, to determine the stress ratio for the dikes in the Koppel Pluton and the dikes in the peninsular gneiss. For the Koppel Pluton, the equation used will be Pf less than sigma 2, and for the peninsular gneiss, the equation used will be for Pf greater than sigma 2. And this yields the orientations of sigma 1, sigma 2, sigma 3 for the Koppel Pluton as well as for the peninsular gneiss. And as we can see that the orientations are more or less similar. So to conclude about the state of stress for the Copal Pluton dikes as well as the dikes in the peninsular gneiss, we have the following conclusions. During pegmatite dike emplacement syntectonically with late D3 deformation in the Dharwar Craton, sigma 1 had shallow plunge while sigma 2 was the steepest principal axis. And that is why I have put sigma 2 in red in the image before you. Since the Copal Pluton is around 2.5 GA in age and the diking is the last tectonic event recorded in the region, this paleostress defines the state of stress during cratonization or stabilization of the Dharwar Craton at 2.5 GA. And because the sigma 2 is the steepest axis out of the three principal axes of the stress ellipsoid, it is inferred that strike slip component was strong during this overall oblique slip phenomenon during dike emplacement process in the Copal Pluton. So this is the overall kinematic model that we have evolved to explain the emplacement of dikes in the Copal Pluton. So we already have discussed earlier that the magnetic foliation in the Copal Pluton is northeast southwest striking, and this is related to the northwest southeast far field stresses, that is the D3 shortening that is commonly known in the Dharwar Craton. So the mean magnetic foliation, which is early in D3, is northeast southwest striking, and there was a partitioning of strain during the late D3 deformation during the emplacement process of the Copal Pluton. So the kinematic model for dike emplacement is as follows. We have the early SIN D3 magnetic foliation, and this is the D3 shortening, which is controlled by the northwest southeast far field stress. The strain partitioning takes place during the progressive deformation during late D3, and the orientation of the maximum instantaneous stretching axis during this late D3 deformation would be uh, northeast southwest to east northeast west southwest. Now, as a consequence of this, there is dilation taking place perpendicular to the ISA max, and the pegmatite dikes, they intrude in this particular direction, which would be northwest southeast striking. And that is exactly what we have in the field, that the pegmatite dikes in the Copal Pluton have a dominantly northwest southeast orientation. So that is the orientation of the magnetic foliation, which is northeast southwest, and that is the maximum that we have for the pegmatite dikes in the Copal Pluton. And this is the state of stress during D3 dike emplacement, where the sigma 2 is steep as compared to the other two principal stress axes. And according to us, this is the state of stress during cratonization or stabilization of the Dharwar Craton at 2.5 GA. So for detailed data, the audience is encouraged to take a look at some of the published works from my research group, and this gives a lot of details about the emplacement mechanism of the granitoid as well as the pegmatite dikes. But the study doesn't end here, because all these principles of determining the paleostress also lead to other questions. And an important question is, was the state of stress during cretonization at 2.5 GA same for the entire Dharwar Craton? So Dharwar Craton is a very huge, you see, block. It's a huge area, and there are certain domains within the Dharwar Craton where there is mineralization, and there are certain domains where there is no mineralization. So, for example, in the Gadag region, there are zones where there is mineralization, and there are zones where there is no mineralization. And there are veins in the mineralized as well as the non-mineralized part. However, when we apply the same methodology of determining the paleostress from the vein orientations in the mineralized and non-mineralized zones of the Gadag region, we find that there is a difference in the state of stress for these two zones, that is the mineralized zone and the non-mineralized zone. So this is an example from one outcrop where there is a possibility, of using the same vein orientation data and determining the state of stress when the fluid pressure was greater than sigma 2 and less than sigma 2. And we are able to do a similar exercise with vein orientation data for the two conditions for the non-mineralized part, and we find that there is a difference in the state of stress. That means there is a local variation in the state of stress in the mineralized vis-a-vis non-mineralized zones of the Gadag region. So this tells us that the state of stress during cretonization at 2.5 GA could not have been the same for the entire Dharwar Craton. So this type of approach, of using vein orientations and dike orientations for determining the state of stress can be very helpful in understanding the variations in paleostress between mineralized and non-mineralized zones, and this can then be applied for exploration targeting. Likewise, on a regional scale also, we find that uh, there are so many schist belts in the Dharwar Craton, and some of them have gold mineralization, whereas others have no reported gold deposit. So likewise, in Hatti also there is so much gold, and there is a active gold mining going on in the Hatti region. But then in areas like Raichur, further east of Hatti, we do not have any significant reported gold deposit. So the approach that I have presented to you in this entire seminar is also, bringing to light various applications of this approach for understanding the processes that lead to domainal fluid flow and mineralization, and how this may be controlled by variations in paleostress on a regional scale. So in conclusion, analyzing paleostress in the Dharwar Craton provides information about the state of stress during stabilization or cratonization at 2.5 GA. This was a very unique study that was done by my research team, and probably to the best of my knowledge, it is the first study that comments on the state of stress during cretonization, at least for the Dharwar Creton. Uh, the approach is very integrated, and it involves understanding the time relationship between regional deformation and emplacement of a granitoid. And this technique, this objective itself involves field and AMS measurements, and subsequently these data and interpretations are integrated with the vein or dike orientation data to comment on the kinematics of the dike or vein emplacement, and then the state of stress determined from uh, the vein or dike orientation data provides us with the uh, enough, provides us with enough information to comment on the state of stress during cretonization at 2.5 GA. And this is, of course, very futuristic conclusion that paleostress analysis in mineralized and non-mineralized zones of the Dharwar Craton can help in exploration targeting, as well as in better understanding of the processes of fluid flow and mineralization. And this particular conclusion, which is more of a hunch, needs to be tested and retested in many mineralized and non-mineralized zones of the Dharwar Craton. Thank you very much for your attention.